This is Matthew Cheung, CEO of ipushpull, and the following is a conversation with Anvar Karimson, CTO of Kepler Cheuvreux, on the topic, what is your chat strategy? Anvar shares his thoughts on chatbots, automation, and the application of AI and large language models into financial markets workflow. Enjoy.
Chatbots today, we use large language models in production. I think if we start with the first case, chatbot. So we are predominantly using Symphony because it's internal. We use it for workflow automation instead of having to go to a web page, that kind of stuff. We use it to disseminate content so that you can create, I guess, particular rooms where you're interested in particular topics, and then you have bots that would sift through our internal repositories to be able to surface the right information to you, which is really helpful for sales and sales trading to a certain extent. You look at language models, so we're using OpenAI's GPT-4 for all of our work. And there we're using it for things like summarization, translation, changing the tones of documents. If you have something that's highly technical, but you need it for sales dissemination, you might just smoothen the language a bit, and that's where the language models really shine. I mean, obviously, nothing we have goes straight to clients or straight to end users without a double check, because they still have some gaps that make them unsuitable for direct to client dissemination. If we look at the execution space, there's just so many venues. There's so much. The landscape is just so much more complicated today than it was just a few years ago, and it's to the point where it's actually really hard for someone to have a good overview, which is why you have various market structure experts, and you have all these conferences to talk about this. But on a simple level, right, you could train a language model to look at the order activity that's going on a venue from our perspective as a broker, right? And you could get it to summarize that in snippets throughout the day. And I think color like that would be really interesting. And of course, no one's going to pay extra for it, so you can't really put someone in a seat to do that manually, because you're just not going to get your money back. But if you can do that in an automated fashion, that gets really interesting, and as such, you can have, it doesn't have to be per venue. You can find a different access to use there. But I think what is important there is that it's natural language and it's done through a chat interface. So for something like this to be truly successful, it would have to be on Bloomberg, realistically. But once there, I think it would create a really good platform to expand on. And again, I think that you look at so we launched our KCX API a while back, and how people use it is twofold. One is that they're looking at to integrate that into their EMS, right? So that's straightforward. You right click an order or position, you say, give me the volatility forecast or the closing forecast for this particular stock. But the other option is that they use an SDK, right? So you can use a Python SDK and R SDK to integrate directly with their workflows, which is great. So that's more the bulk interface. Like, I want a volatility report every hour sent out. We just say, yeah, you can do that. You build it yourself, you ship it. But again, chat would be a great thing there, right? Because on one hand, being integrated in EMS is great, but you're sort of beholden to the development velocity and the appetite for change of that EMS. The SDK is great, but then it kind of forces our clients to have development resources to make use of that. Whereas again, with a chat interface, that could provide a third potential option, especially if you could get some color around that. Again, we talk about venues, we talk about if you can say, okay, for these 25 stocks, what's the volatility forecast? You get the actual numbers, but then you also get a text block of color looking back 7 days, all of a sudden it just helps you to paint that picture of what's going on, and that's quite interesting. The other point is obviously that you look at, so that's for execution. You look at research. There's obviously tons of things you can do there, but I think on the research side, it's much more sensitive because you're kind of messing with what people bring as a value add, right? So, and I think it's hard to compete because Bloomberg today does the automated research. They've done it for years. When as soon as a corporate action comes out, they'll automatically translate it into something that's more digestible and publish it out within a minute of it being published. So there's not much you can do there, I think. But you talk about on the research side is productivity. That's where we are looking. Well, if you look at our projects internally now, they're all looking at the productivity side of being a content producer, and it doesn't, as a tech guy, the solutions you look at are pretty basic, right? But for the end clients, they're really powerful. And we're super excited to roll out Microsoft Copilot to see how well that works, because our content is generated using the Office suite with FactSet plugins. And so if you can have a Copilot right there, I mean, that's great, right? That means they don't have to jump into another interface. They don't have to jump. They can just in the Word document, have 10 bullet points and say, can you expand this? And then it's a starting point, right? And I think the idea of a Copilot could be quite interesting on an EMS layer as well, right? If you have a widget next to you that just helps you digest all of this information that's going on, especially if it brings in data from previously. I think that could be useful. Again, is someone going to pay extra for that? Probably not. So I think that's kind of cool. And because the other day I tried, so Spotify have introduced a DJ, which is an AI powered recommendation engine, and they've had recommendations before, but they were pretty terrible. The DJ is actually quite cool, and I think what makes it more real, I don't know if you've used it, but what makes it more real is that you get snippets of talking in between blocks of music where the DJ explains, I had a look at your summer playlist history, and I went back 2-3 years. I found these funky songs, and I'm going to mix them together. It forms a bigger connection than just listening to music that keeps streaming. It produces this sort of weird artificial radio experience, and I'm sure that within 2-3 years, someone will have like an old school radio station that is completely just two AIs talking to each other, cracking jokes. I mean, that's going to be a given. But again, that sort of co-pilot in a trading sense would be quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And machines do not forget, so they can always bring back information like that and present it in an interface like chat that makes it really easy to gain some insight or take some actions on it. So I guess there's a few things you mentioned there. So you've got this ability to have your Copilot or like predictive analytics kind of in context type workflows. You've got having chat as the interface. And that's why Chat GPT's become so successful, right? Because chat is the interface. It's a GPT, model under the hood, which had been around for a while, but then Chat GPT then just changed. Yeah, it was an interface moment, right?
Yeah.
And then the last bit, I think you said at the beginning about, and I think it was when we were talking about some of the Symphony bots. But as you're starting to experiment with large language models, you still need the human oversight, because things are still, you're not giving it out externally to clients yet, because there's still the hallucination effects that's in there at the moment. No doubt that will disappear fairly soon, but you still require the human oversight. So it's enabling the brokers that you've got rather than replacing, and it's giving them
completely.
Yeah, and it's productivity. All of this, everything is all about productivity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that sort of summarizes quite well. I think for us, the technology, chat, all of this stuff is about enablement. It's really about being able to deliver better client service, better attention to details, all of that stuff. I think in none of the meetings do we talk about replacing or saving money or using machines to automate people's jobs. It's not what it's about, because I think there are easier way of doing that.
And on that point, where does your data live and sit? How did you address that with the large language models that you're using with Microsoft? Are you using their Azure OpenAI, and it's all you're not using it to obviously train Microsoft's Azure OpenAI API? Did you find that challenging when you were getting sign off kind of internally to do it?
No, not here. I mean, we had to sit down with our legal, our compliance, our risk, everyone, and kind of went through it. And we set up a few guidelines internally of what we're allowed to send to the service and what we're not. And a lot of it is on the, if you look at textual content, is it what's the phrase? Basically, has it been published? Is it known? And then obviously you have PI, which is a big deal. So, removing any sort of personal identifiers and all that. So I think the question marks there, and because we have, we don't use it to train anything and all that, we're fairly comfortable with the idea. But obviously, it's such a fluid field, right? Like, will we move to Llama 2 on Hugging Face or Bedrock? Potentially. But I think that the inflection point of because for now we want to minimize the work of getting a use case up in production, right? Because we're still exploring, we're still figuring out how these things work. And if the upfront cost is okay, well, you have to do all this deployment, all this techie stuff to get it to work, we just won't have time to look at as many use cases. So that was a choice we did in the beginning to say, okay, what's the easiest way to get starting? Okay, it's using OpenAI. They have everything out of the book. We just pay the bill. And that just allows us to test all these different use cases to see, is there actually interest here? And we can do very targeted pilot engagements with clients. And if we stumble upon something really cool, we'll go, wow, this is really impressive. We can then, because we have presence in AWS already, we can spin up something there. And maybe the quality is not going to be the same, but then I think what we're seeing is that the open source models are catching up in a lot of ways. Again, not from an general AI perspective, but certainly for targeted use case, they can be just as effective.
So you went direct to OpenAI rather than go through Microsoft?
Initially, yeah.
Interesting. Going back to the beginning where you said you've got a whole bunch of chatbots built on Symfony for doing various workflows internally. Did you build those chatbots yourselves internally?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. I think it was when we brought Symfony in, which is before my time. It was brought in. A lot of it was because of the chatbots and being able to automate processes. So
yeah,
we did integrate it to quite a few of our different systems. I mean, again, it's not a big deal of moving them to Teams, and at one point we might have to. But for us, it was a reasonably easy lift.
Cool. Okay, I think we covered a wide variety of topics there. It was it was really interesting to hear your thoughts. This is the ipushpull podcast series about what is your chat strategy. Over the next few months, we'll talk to leaders in the field and their views on the chat ecosystem, chatbots, and how AI is evolving the space. We hope you learned something new.